Wake, the hidden history of women-led slave revolts. Usually for these kind of workshops, we'll give a couple minutes for people to come in and get situated, but because of the brief time limits today, we're going to have to get started on time. But as we're going, if you want to just say hello in the chat box, we'd love for you to introduce yourselves. I'm going to introduce our organization, our presenters, but if you want to say like hi, your name, where you're from, if you're a teacher, what you teach, we can start to kind of get to know each other a little bit. We are going to have some breakout room discussion today. All right, let's get started. Okay. So we are educators from the Ida B. Wells Education Project. The Ida B. Wells Education Project is a grassroots multicultural collective of classroom educators dedicated to empowering teachers and students to build a movement against racism in our schools and communities. There we go. Something's not showing up. Sorry, my bad. We named ourselves in the tradition of Black women educators and freedom fighters who were key to the Black liberation movement. So we named ourselves in the tradition of women who understood that education and liberation go hand in hand. So if you see on the slides deck, we highlighted some links to women who inspired our work, like Ella Baker, Erica Huggins, women like that. We should have dropped a copy or a link to the slide deck in the chat box. If someone could drop a link to the slide deck in the chat box as we go, so that you can click on the links as we're going. But if we had to sum up what it is our collective is about in just one sentence, we would say that we believe in teaching for liberation. All right, you can see our agenda on this slide. So we're going to start with our introduction, our welcome. And for our presenters today, I am Peta, Lindsay. I am the director of the Ida B. Wells Education Project. I'm also a social science teacher in Los Angeles. I currently teach AP US History, African American Studies, and Ethnic Studies. I'm also on the Ethnic Studies leadership team for my district. Charla Johnson is also going to be presenting today. She's a board member for the Ida B. Wells Education Project, and she's also an ELA teacher. So we'll start with talking about the graphic novel itself. I don't know how much familiarity you all have with this graphic novel, but it's really powerful, really important classroom resource. We're going to talk a little bit about that and kind of give you a chance to explore, look at some of the pages. And then we'll go into some of the teaching activities that we're offering as curriculum to go with this graphic novel project, and we'll get into some of those as well. All right. So first off, let's talk about what this graphic novel is. And you can go ahead and chime in the chat box. Have you heard of this novel before? Is this something that you've read or something you've heard of? But this is a really powerful graphic novel. So it's received a great deal of acclaim. Multiple publications reported as one of the best books of 2021. It was up for many awards. It really has made an impact on the field when it came out. And it's a powerful graphic novel that tells the story of one African-American woman scholar's search to uncover the hidden legacy of women-led resistance to African slavery. And so the woman who wrote this book, Dr. Rebecca Hall, is an African-American woman scholar, and it's really about her journey in trying to uncover the stories of like our women warriors in the past. So we were lucky enough to work with the author in developing this curriculum, and we'll talk a little bit more about kind of her thoughts about the curriculum and the classroom lessons that we developed for this piece. But I was thinking that the first thing we could do is, I can kind of describe the book, but there's a really good little short video that was made by the publisher about the book. So I thought maybe we could watch the video together and then think about like what thoughts and feelings, oops, sorry, I went back. What thoughts and feelings does the story bring up for you? How might students respond to this story, do you think? All right, I'm going to switch over. Can you get a thumbs up? Are you able to see the video screen or no? Yes, okay, great. All right, and hopefully you're able to hear it. I did do the share sounds.
I am a historian, a granddaughter of slaves, and I am haunted. For hundreds of years, our ancestors were brutally silenced. I wasn't supposed to find their voices. Sometimes when you're hunting down the past is hunting you. Women warriors led revolts on slave ships and fought their enslavers in the Americas. And then they were erased from history. Wake uncovers this history. I was born to tell this story. I had no idea that uncovering their stories would be its own fight. Wake is a powerful reminder that while the past is gone, we still live in its wake.
All right, I'm going to stop share if we just want to maybe react in the chat box. So what are, did anybody have any kind of reactions to the trailer? Are these something that, is this something you think might be powerful for students or something, how might students react? We could take a minute if you'd like to, or I can just keep going and talk about the resource. I'll give like 30 seconds if anyone wants to give a reaction or thoughts about the video clip. All right, it looks fire. I agree. It's so good though. And it's really hard to just talk about it. So I'm trying to kind of give you a way to experience it. All right, thank you, Brian. All right, I'll keep going. Okay, so let's go back into share screen. Okay. So for us, I think the question is, why should you use this resource in your classroom? And why do we feel strongly that this resource should be used in classrooms? So I'm going to talk for a minute about that and why I think it's important to bring this one into your curriculum. So the transatlantic slave trade is a major part of all the social science. Oops, sorry, there's a typo there. I will fix that later. All the social science and ELA curriculums, right? And every year I teach this topic, and every year I work with teachers who teach this topic who are really struggling to teach it in a way that is not dehumanizing, teaching it in a way that's focusing on the humanity of the people involved, and teaching it in a way that's not completely demoralizing or depressing for students. Like psychologically, it's a very hard topic to cover. And this book gives you a way to tell this story in a way that is empowering, in a way that centers the resistance and the agency of Africans and of Black women in particular, who were leaders in this movement, in these revolts. So I think that's really important in terms of framework for how you are teaching the transatlantic slave trade. You want to use resources like this. You want to use resources that bring humanity to the story and agency and kind of center the heroic resistance and leadership of Black people. I also think, this is based on Dr. Rebecca Hall did a great deal of research for her PhD and her dissertation. And so she had access to some records that we have not really had widespread access before. And so she pulls an incredible amount of factual information about women-led revolts and primary sources. And you could really just take some of these documents that she uncovered. And we did, for our curriculum page, format these documents for ease of use so that you guys can use it. You could take these documents and use them in your classroom. And it's really interesting kind of new information that, again, centers that agency and resistance. What I like about it too is that it's also a first-person narrative, and we know that first-person narratives are really important for people and young people, especially, to connect with a story. And so you are experiencing the story through the eyes of Dr. Hall, and part of it that she really brings to the fore, and the illustrations and the text, and it's really a beautiful way that they discuss this, is her processing historical trauma. Is her really talking about what it feels like to be a Black woman and be reading these stories, these really heavy stories of brutality and inhumanity against Black women, right? And so I think that's really valuable and can be really valuable for students, right? When you're asking them to learn these things, there is some trauma there. And so having a way to discuss processing that or focus on processing that is important. Also, and I think one of the most compelling things about this book is that it's her journey in trying to research transatlantic slave revolts. And one of the things she discovers over and over again is how individuals and institutions conspire to keep this information out of the record, right? To bury this historical information because they know how powerful it is. And so she talks a lot about things that happened in the past and really explains like how this information is left out of our records, like from the 1700s because of the decisions of people in that era. But then also in her journey, she's trying to uncover this information in the present day. She receives a lot of pushback. There's an incredible chapter where she goes to Lloyd's of London because they have insurance records on slave ships. And so those are some of the best records on slave revolts, and they will not let her have the info. So I think it's really great also for centering a conversation with students or bringing to the forefront a conversation with students about how history is hidden, right? And how bias, determines what goes into the history books, right? And what is history? And kind of this question of wrestling with that. I think those are some of the really compelling reasons that we feel strongly about this resource. And we really feel like this is something that can be positive and more people should be bringing into their classrooms. I think the last thing is that the graphic novel format is very compelling for students as well. But I am not an ELA teacher. So in terms of talking about the graphic novel format, I'm going to go ahead and toss it to Charla. Oh no, was I not sharing screen that whole time? I thought I was sharing screen.
You were.
Okay.
Yeah, you were sharing the screen.
Okay, so we're done. So I'm not sharing screen right now, right? Okay, so Charla, you're up.
All right. So let's see here. All right, well, hey everybody, I'm Charla. And so I'm going to talk about why we should use the graphic novel or the graphic narratives in classrooms in general. So I will make, a little distinction between the graphic novel, and this is Dr. Hall's distinction, but I think it's important in terms of genre. So graphic novels would depict fictional situations, and a graphic narrative is a nonfiction text, if you will. So Wake is her own personal story. And so it's a first person narrative, and it's the story of these women-led slave revolts. And so referring to it as a narrative is important because there's that aspect that it is a nonfiction. So in general, graphic narratives or graphic novels is a really rich and compelling genre where students, through some kind of exploring the relationship between the written word, the text, and also like visual elements, they get to critically, visually, and informationally develop literacy as thinkers and creators. One of the things that I really love about our curriculum is that not only do they learn how to read and analyze a graphic novel or narrative, but they get the opportunity to create their own. And so you want to explore that project in depth if you're interested, where they choose a historical figure, a piece of activism, some hidden history that's important to them, and they can develop their own graphic narrative through research and employing some of the techniques that they learn through the analysis. So that's really dope. So with that in mind, you would want to teach graphic novels or narratives alongside your more traditional literary text. If you still use a textbook, these texts kind of enrich that information, right? So it helps them contextualize primary source evidence, offers multiple perspectives, and it helps them share some emerging understandings, right? So in general, I think Wake is excellent because it is exposing a hidden history. It empowers students through learning about her journey and the way she has to interact with these institutions that did not initially welcome her, right? They can kind of contextualize these and apply these ideas, in their own local or global challenges. So this is going to kind of like segue into what we'll do in our first breakout room. So when you do teach the graphic novel or the graphic narrative, you want to kind of explicitly teach some of these technical elements that are used. So the author and the illustrator, Hugo Martinez, they collaborated hand in hand and worked very closely to tell this story. And there's an emphasis on the technical elements that were used to create this story. So for instance, over here to the left of the screen, these are some of the elements that you would teach explicitly in the How to Read Wake lesson. So you would talk about layout. You would define what a panel is, what a frame is, define the gutter. So in this situation, this whole image or page is the panel. Of course, we've got frames that are enclosed, and then there's the space in between the frames, that's the gutter. A lot of stuff happens in between the gutter. So you already have readers making inferences about what's happening in between the gutters in order to get a continuity of story. Analyzing foreground, midground, and background, why certain images are placed in the foreground, why some are in the background. Also other things, graphic weight, faces. So again, emphasis on visual literacy here alongside captions and narration in the speech and thought balloons. So with that being said, I think this is going to take us into our first activity. So you're going to get into breakout rooms and analyze panels from the comics together. So you've got this link, and hopefully you are able to open our slide deck, and so you can access this link, or maybe if we can put it in the chat. But yeah, when you're inside, okay, so when you're inside of the breakout room, you are going to open the document that matches your breakout room. And in the room, I would like for you to discuss the panel that you have. What is the main message, theme, or idea? What mood or feelings are being evoked in that panel? What details or techniques are used to convey these feelings? So you want to look at some of the decisions that the artist made along with the author, and then also maybe consider how might students react to this particular panel. All right.
Fantastic. Does anyone want to share kind of with the whole group what you were talking about in your small group? We can take maybe 2 minutes to kind of debrief. I certainly was able to drop it on some great conversation. Anyone want to share? Great, awesome. We got a hand. So yeah, is that Brian? Fantastic. You want to share?
I'll be brief. Just one thing I was thinking of as we were wrapping things up in my room is that, you know, I'm not ELA, I'm social studies, right? And so when, you know, people talk about, you know, doing history and teaching historical skills and, you know, the things that historians use and this sort of thing, this sort of, you know, narrative of that really demonstrates like what historical research is all about and piecing together the past is really useful in that regard as a model.
Absolutely. Thank you for contributing that. And that was a great topic of conversation in the breakout room we were in. All right, that's actually a really good segue to showing you guys some of the curriculum that we developed that actually does kind of try to simulate the idea of this historical research journey, right? And what does a historian actually do? So we'll keep going. Again, just for the interest of time, we got a few activities we're going to take you through today. But thank you so much for you know, analyzing, discussing those panels and groups. But let's keep going. So I'm going to drop a link to our curriculum page in the. Oh yeah, that is these are really cool ideas in the chat box. I recommend everyone pay attention to the chat box. There are some very cool ideas pairing with the Legend of Igbo Landing and Beyonce's imagery in the Lemonade video. I would love to pause for a second. Nicole, do you want to talk a little bit about that? We can just pause for, you know, one second.
Oh, sure. So in the Lemonade video and in a couple of she did a lot of this imagery with some of Black Parade as well. The Legend of Igbo Landing actually took place, like, I guess, off the coast, like, of the Sea Islands, where there were a bunch of Igbo enslaved Africans who, rather than be taken captive, collectively committed suicide. And that's what Eric Killmonger mentions in Black Panther. That's what he's referring to. So I already do a Legend of Igbo Landing, and I do the Myth of the Flying African. It's like a whole unit. So I can see this would fit in really nicely with that.
Yes, and particularly with like talking about ancestors in the water, there's some really beautiful imagery and kind of prose about that in the novel. I really like, I do think that's a great pairing. Thank you so much for sharing.
Sure.
All right. Okay, so I did just drop the link to the curriculum page. If y'all want to check out the curriculum page, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've got over there. So let me do share screen. Give me a sec. Okay. So specifically, I want to talk about one of the project-based learning offerings that we developed for this curriculum, because a lot of folks were talking about in the breakout room that I was in, we're talking about Wake as a research journey, right? And so this novel does a really good job of showing students like what it is that historians do, and like actually how you actually go through the process of like wrestling this hidden history out of the historical record, right? And so when we were working with the author, with Dr. Rebecca Hall, like this was the overriding theme, right? And this was something she felt really strongly about. And one of the big things we wanted to do was bring that experience to students, right? So not just have them kind of passively discussing the novel, but have them try to do this kind of work themselves and find a way to structure and guide this work. And so if you look at the curriculum page, we've got it here. There's a summary of the novel, all this stuff up top. I'm going to scroll down. Project-based learning. So we have a graphic novel project. It's 4 steps. It's called Retrieving Our Resistance, the graphic novel project inspired by Wake. And so Charla mentioned it earlier, but I just want to draw your attention to this project and maybe show you just a little bit of it. So it's actually, there are many steps, like I said, but what I've learned in developing these kind of projects is that there are some years that I can do all of the steps, and there are some years that I'll just pull a certain graphic organizer. We'll just use this little piece for this time because that's what we have time for. So I'd really encourage you all to look through all of the things that we're offering in this project. Even if you feel like you wouldn't have time to do the whole thing, you might want to pull certain elements of it. You can do certain activities at certain times. I'm going to go ahead and open the project slides and then skip forward in the project slides just to explain the project. So these slides are things that you could use in your classroom. And so we have things like a quick write, we have scaffolding, vocabulary, things like that. But I'm going to scroll down to the project overview. So it says in this project, students will examine local primary sources looking for hidden stories of resistance. Students will research these sources and then write their own critically fabulated version of events in the form of graphic novel. And so it starts off with a definition of this term, critical fabulation. And this is another term that Dr. Hall felt very strongly about. Critical fabulation is a term that was coined by the scholar Saadia Hartman, and it's called, the description is a semi-non-fictional style of writing that attempts to bring the suppressed voices of the past to the surface by means of hard research and scattered facts. So this is where you're specifically looking for the stories that are undertold or stories that are untold, right? And you're finding as much as you can, like you're going as deep into the historical record as you can, but acknowledging where you're going to have to critically fabulate, where based on what you have, you're going to have to come up with narratives to kind of restore the humanity in this story. So if you're interested in learning more about that concept, and it's just a good concept to maybe apply in some of these social science classes or ELA classes, we do have interviews and links to some resources about that if you wanted to work through that with students. But let's just look at the project steps. So step one, you would have students analyze primary source historical texts, identifying key missing information and biases in the text. So you'd select a historical event, and you as the instructor, I would try to find, primary sources about that event that do have some kind of glaring omissions, right? And kind of hone students' skills of looking for those omissions. And then step two, you would then have them, once you have that event, once you realize what's missing in the narrative, we have a graphic organizer for generating questions, right? And kind of thinking what's not in the narrative, what do I need to find out? So then you have students thoroughly research that event, find as much as they can, right? So get as much information as they can. Again, identifying where key information cannot be located. Then step three, they're going to write based on what they have found. They're going to write a critically fabulate, a semi-non-fictional narrative version of events based on available historical information. And then for step four, we have a lot of resources for actually helping students create a graphic novel narrative of their own, of this own events. So again, with Wake, we have some great resources for having you kind of use the text, but we also have resources for bringing students into this process, into this journey themselves. The example that I made for this presentation is I'm in Los Angeles. So I thought that there are two examples that I decided to use. Well, we can go really quick. The Zoot Suit Riot was one. And so this is something that the original primary source historical texts on them, if you read them, completely deny the personhood and the agency of the Mexican-American people involved. And it's a devastating event that is not covered well in the sources. Another one is the Black Cat Tavern Riot, which is a really important LGBTQ fight back that happened in the late 1960s. So similar, the original sources at the time are not really giving much credit to the personhood or agency. And so we have activities for like looking at those events, and then having students look for like personhood and agency in those texts. And so we have a graphic organizer to help students with that. And then you can have them, provide more text, have them do research, etc. I'm going to stop here just in the interest of time. But really what I was trying to do is get you all to kind of look through this graphic novel project and see if this is something that even if you don't want to do the whole project, maybe you might want to do some of these steps or implement some of these concepts in your classroom. So I'll stop there. Does anyone have questions about that? Okay. All right, I think I'm gonna toss it to Charla. Charla, I think you're on mute.
On mute. Okay. All right. So yeah, so in addition to that really dope project, there are some activities that we provide in the curriculum during reading to support that. And one of those is hexagonal thinking. And it's a classroom discussion strategy that I find really interesting to use. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, and then we'll get into breakout rooms and you'll practice it on your own. So essentially, let me tell you, what it is. It's a framework for critical thinking and discussion. It's collaborative, and it facilitates the connection making between ideas and then considering the nuances of those connections. So in a nutshell, how it works is you would give a small group of students a deck of hexagons and allow them to make connections as they see fit. So, in fact, it may be easier if I let you peek at it first. We'll get this out of the way. or we won't. Okay, never mind. So at any rate, so this is a sample from the activity that's included in the curriculum. And so you have the hexagons over here, and then you have a list of concepts or ideas that are pulled from the text. Now, there are lots of opportunities to differentiate. For instance, you could do this activity tangibly, like using chart paper and physical blank hexagons that are also provided on the curriculum page. So, or you can use this slide deck where they can literally kind of drag and drop these concepts onto the hexagon. And so each hexagon is representative of that idea. You could have students generate their own concepts. We pulled these, you could pull them, you could provide half and let them pick the others. But at any rate, you take an idea and you have like a mental map of, you know, where you may want it to go. So for instance, I may decide that history is what the book is about at its core. So I may think, well, I can drag that here. I may have students work on this individually and then get into their small groups and kind of synthesize their mental maps, put that together. And so you, again, would place these and just drag and drop, make so there's a history of racism. And so I'm looking at each side as a connector. So I'm thinking about how racism relates to history, and I would use either an arrow or a line or a dash to indicate that relationship. Any questions, comments, concerns? I feel like I explained that really quickly. You want to just try it out, see how it feels?
Yeah, so the idea is to, you know, as Charla was saying, could use this to generate discussion. So maybe we could try in breakout groups to see if this generates some discussion for y'all, if you want to play around with moving the tiles and maybe making connections, discussing why, you know, those connections were made as a way to, another way of analyzing these ideas.
Right. And so you could use this so as a pre-reading activity. So these are organized by chapter. These ideas come from the prologue in chapter 1. So you could use this as a way to preview the reading, and students can draw on their prior knowledge, their existing knowledge, what they know about these terms to make some predictions or, like, you know, explore how they already have ideas about these concepts. And then they could come back after reading and kind of adjust their map based on what they've read. So in your breakout rooms, you'll choose, I mean, these in the slide where the links are, well, goodness, the links where the slides are, anyway, they're labeled breakout 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you'll choose the one that matches your room and work with your folks and kind of start making a mental map. Place, drag and drop the ideas to the hexagons and kind of tussle it out where you think those things should go and what kind of connections you make. And then we'll come back and discuss.
All right, welcome back, folks. Let me see folks coming back in. Great. So we're in our last couple of minutes here. I jumped in on some really great conversations. I don't know if anyone wants to share what they were talking about in their groups. We do have a survey for participants in the workshop today. If you want to fill that out, it's in the chat box. We'd really appreciate you fill that out. But just, you know, as our final last couple of minutes, does anyone want to have questions, concerns, want to say anything, report back? Any thoughts you had while doing that activity? Yeah, sure. Anya?
I appreciated how open some of those topics were, like water and history, and then how specific some were. And it gave different kinds of thinkers an entry point. You know, we're not all fact people, and some of us come to that kind of story in a different way. And I appreciated how open that exercise actually turned out to be, because it seemed when I saw it at first, I was like, oh, we just have to put the things in the slots, but it was much more expansive than I thought it was going to be. So thank you.
Charla, you're on mute.
Okay. So one of the things that I really enjoy about this activity is that it is really accessible. It's not intimidating, really. You know, it's like, okay, like you said, I can put some terms on a shape, but you kind of slide into this really interesting metacognitive activity. So yeah. Anybody else? Thoughts on how you might use this in your classroom? Okay, cool.
All right. I guess that's all we have for y'all today. Please keep in touch. We have this survey at the bottom, which is a great way to stay in touch with us. We would love to continue working together, building together. I'm going to repost the survey. But thanks so much for joining us. And I hope that this has been helpful for you in, teaching some of these topics.